Israelis got used to seeing these kind of images on television of several terror bombings and terror victims throughout the early 2000s. However, when terrorists blew up the Park Hotel building inside Netanya, Israel had no choice but to respond with a military operation called Operation Defensive Shield. The reason why the Park Hotel probably created more of a response from the Israeli government is because many of the victims who were inside the Park Hotel during the Passover holiday were senior citizens who were not only senior citizens but were also Holocaust survivors. This enraged an entire nation and called the government to action. Israel launched Operation Defensive Shield right after this massacre, and they re-entered areas in the West Bank, cities like Jenin, Nablus, Ramallah, Jericho, and Hebron, in order to stop the violence that these terrorists were coming out and blowing up people. And this was the mission that they had to do. These are one of the reservists who took action during the Operation Defensive Shield. They operated within the city that was the most difficult fighting for the Israeli forces, which was the city of Jenin.
ברמת עם, ברמת מדינה, כדי לעצור את התהליך הזה.
ידענו שאנחנו אמורים להיכנס למחנה הפליטים בג'נין. המטרה שלנו לנסות ולמצוא אמצעי לחימה, לאתר מעבדות נפץ, לנסות ואולי לעצור טרוריסטים.
הרגישו די בטוחים. הרגישו שאף אחד לא ייגע בהם, כולל לא הרשות הפלסטינית. הם למעשה מעבר לכל יכולת נגיעה בהם.
The terrorists within Jenin were ready. They had their guns set. They had their traps laid out in their ambushes. They were just waiting for the Israelis to come into Jenin.
نحن في كتائب شهداء الأقصى الجناح العسكري لحركة فتح سنتصدى بكل ما نملك من قوة وإمكانيات للتصدي لأي هجوم تنوي عصابات المجرم شارون تنفيذه في محافظة جنين ونحذر المجرم شارون والمستوطنين المجرمين الخنازير أننا بالمرصاد لهم في كل شارع ومنطقة.
التحضيرات لهذا الاجتياح خلال هذه المدة بعمل ورش للعبوات المقذوفة والناسفة اللي بنسميها الأكواع احنا. استعدادات الشباب من ناحية التسلح.
והיה ברור לכולם שזה הפעם מלחמה אמיתית.
مناورات في الذخيرة الحية خلينا نسميها. ما حدث في مخيم جنين هو مناورات خلينا نقول في الذخيرة الحية حرب حقيقية.
في الذات في مخيم جنين استعدادات يعني الحمد لله رب العالمين جيدة جدا من كل النواحي، من ناحية استشهاديين، من ناحية عبوات ناسفة، من ناحية عبوات موجهة، من ناحية قنابل يدوية بالمئات. الحمد لله رب العالمين استعداداتنا بإذن الله جيدة جدا ومعنويات الشباب الحمد لله جيدة جدا.
كتائب شهداء الأقصى مستعدين لأي طارئ موجود عندنا بالمخيم ولأي مواجهة احنا مستعدين لها. طبعا الجيش الإسرائيلي طبعا مستهدف المخيم في الأساس يعني كون المخيم يعني معظم الموجودين مطلوبين موجودين داخل مخيم جنين والمستهدف الرئيسي اللي هو مخيم جنين.
As the battle raged on in the Jenin refugee camp and bodies started to pile up on both sides, the Israelis found themselves in a difficult situation where not only did they have tanks and also heavy machinery within Jenin. Once you bring in those heavy kind of machineries like tanks, you're very, very vulnerable to RPGs. The terrorists ended up taking some of the soldiers' dead bodies into certain rooms, hoping perhaps to use them as some kind of a swap in a future deal with Israel. And you had the eye in the sky looking at everything that happened. War crimes and massacres within Jenin.
In Jenin refugee camp, the Palestinians say there was a massacre. Israel says there wasn't.
The massacre in Jenin, the massacre in the old city of Nablus, the siege of the Nativity Church, Beit Lahem area.
However, within the Arab media itself, the Arabs told more of the truth, that it was really more of clashes and gunfire between Israeli forces and terrorists within Jenin.
عشرات فقط من المقاتلين والمقاومين الفلسطينيين
الهليكوبتر وسيارات الإسعاف الإسرائيلية التي تنتظر لنقل الجرحى والقتلى، لكن الوضع المتفجر داخل المخيم وهذا الكمين الذي تمثل بإيقاع مجموعة من الجنود الإسرائيليين في حقل ألغام وتفجير الألغام بهم ثم شن هجوم عليهم قد إلى حد ما حول الأمور رأسا على عقب، خاصة بعد ليلة كان فيها هدوء.
الحقيقة أن يعني المواجهة تتم من حي إلى حي وموقع إلى موقع كحرب العصابات، يستخدم فيها المجاهدين البنادق الآلية والعبوات الناسفة والقنابل اليدوية.
بطبيعة الحال هو مخيم جنين. في هذا المخيم لا تزال هناك اشتباكات. بعض شهود العيان أفادوا بأن المقاتلون الفلسطينيون يشنون بين الحين والآخر هجمات، أي انقضاض على بعض المواقع الخاصة بالجيش الإسرائيلي سواء في محيط المستشفى.
أقل من 100 فدائي فلسطيني كانوا مزودين فقط في أسلحة كلاشينكوف والإم 16 وقنابل تسمى يدوية، ولكن هي عبارة عن أنابيب مياه تم تجهيزها كعبوات مصنعة محليا، حتى المتفجرات التي في داخلها مصنعة محليا. على الرغم من ذلك صمدوا 8 أيام.
About hundreds of people massacred in Jenin, and even the Knesset has today stopped that to move the bodies of those massacred people.
They have to see the massacre in Jenin. They have to understand exactly what the massacring Palestinians means to Palestinians.
That means basically more murder and killing of Palestinian civilians. They're killing our people in Nablus. A massacre has been committed in Jenin.
صهاينة هذا الصباح.
الجنود الصهاينة قام أحد المقاومين الفلسطينيين، يعني جميع المقاومين فخخوا أنفسهم منذ أيام، تظلموا بالأحزمة الناسفة حتى لا يؤسروا أو يستسلموا، وبأنهم مصممون على القتال حتى الشهادة. قام أحد المقاومون بتفجير نفسه بمجموعة.
Did you see anything that in the conventional sense of the term could be defined as a massacre?
If you're asking, did I see tens of people killed? Frankly, no. In my group, we were in an area with no other people. 3 fighters with me were killed. It was like hunting, like being given a prize. I couldn't believe it when I saw the soldiers. The Israelis knew that any soldier who went into the camp like that was going to get killed. I've been waiting for a moment like that for years.
Like the Israeli soldiers, he said the fighting was fierce.
Yet here is a report of actually more accurately of what happened. Here's a journalist that went in and spoke with both the army and the terrorists who were involved in the fighting around Jenin, and he actually got real answers to what really happened and how the fighting actually came about, interviewed both sides. And his reporting was actually a lot more realistic and down to the real facts on the ground, as opposed to what the terrorists were telling the Western media about what was happening.
Started shooting at us, we responded and shot at them. Our feelings towards the martyrs is to protect their sacrifice, to protect their blood.
This is urban warfare. The fighters' videos tell the story. When it ended, many British and European news agencies described a different story. Israeli soldiers.
This was the epicenter of the Battle of Jenin. This is where the hardest fighting took place. and it's also where the massacre myth was conceived.
Israel immediately launched a counteroffensive. 45% of all Palestinian bombings and shootings emanated from Jenin. Palestinian fighters were entrenched in the heart of the city in what is known as the refugee camp. It is a warren of densely packed buildings and alleyways. This is Jonathan discovering explosive booby traps.
Look out, because you are stepping on a bomb. And he told me, this is a bomb. I saw hundreds of them here.
Jonathan claims an Air Force attack was called off because too many civilians would have been killed. To finish the job, the military sent in armored bulldozers. They literally crushed the last holdouts. To check out Jonathan's version, we made contact with Palestinians who fought in Jenin. As we approached Jenin, a column of Israeli tanks were pulling out. They were fighting gunmen from the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigade, the same fighters whom we hoped to meet.
Driving through Jenin now.
We are told to follow a black car. The vehicle takes us to a hideout in the city. We meet Muntasser and his friends from the Al-Aqsa Martyr Brigades.
Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
One of them is slightly wounded from the fighting earlier in the morning. Muntasser confirmed his men were well entrenched in the refugee camp, while Jonathan and his unit were moving in.
We knew very well our camp, our streets, the alleyways. We had an advantage in this battle. It was difficult for the enemy, and that obliged them to use air power and tanks to shell us. We fought hard.
Muntasser also confirms Israeli bulldozers ultimately defeated them.
The Israelis on the end of the 7th day were able to control the area after they started to use huge bulldozers to destroy houses above us and above the citizens.
The big question remained, who was buried under the rubble?
I have mothers calling me, speaking about missing their daughters, their sons. I have husbands missing their wives. I have parents missing their grandparents. The number that we have been told to us throughout the West Bank incursions, 500. But I'm afraid to tell you that they have been doing a lot of cover-up.
The BBC was billboarding the massacre story without journalistically digging deeper to really see what was under the destruction. An amnesty expert was already accusing the Israelis of atrocities similar to the thousands murdered in Bosnia and Kosovo. But when the UN uncovered the truth, it was clear that out of 45... The massacre headlines had already reached millions around the world.
These are a lot of the weapons Israel later confiscated after the battle. You can see these guys were ready for war. They had grenades. They had tons of ammunition. They had tons of explosives, just ready to kill and murder Israeli soldiers. After having been hit with many lies from the Western media and international press about a so-called massacre in Jenin, Israel had to bring in journalists into the area to actually show what really happened. Here is one soldier who was there in Jenin who took journalists with him to show him the city and show them the truth of what really happened.
I saw no massacre. No bodies rolling on the floors. You're welcome. We're going to take you to the places which were destroyed by the bulldozers. The center of the camp. This is the place where we had the massive objection of terrorists. Massive objection. Them came in to try to take out the wounded and give them a medical support.
Okay, that's 1, 2. Sir, we have.
Guys.
Okay, have a good day. You can speak to the television. You can say what we spoke here.
How many people do you think died here, sir?
I don't know because I am not entered to the camp, and I don't know.
At the end of the day, the UN issued a report.
In Jenin, 26 were killed.